So in this video, I will be answering how I strip my minis and then prepare them for painting. And this is another one of my community questions videos where I answer your questions that you throw in my comments, Discord or email. For me, when it comes to stripping minis, there's a couple of things to consider. The first thing is, does it actually need stripping? So some of the minis that I've got actually come with quite thin paint on there. They're a decent paint job, and for the vast majority of them, they don't actually need stripping. Once you throw a primer over the top of them, they look as good as new. You don't need to do all of that effort. However, some of them are caked in paint and glue and other goopy stuff, and that's where the stripping process comes in. So my historic way I've been doing this is using Dettol, and that's because I'm in the UK and some of the stuff that's available in other countries aren't available. If you are based in like the US or something else and you know a really good stripping material, throw it down in the comments just for the other viewers as well who are based in different locations. But in the UK, I started off with Dettol. Now, in my opinion, Dettol does work better than the other solution I'm going to come on with, but it's horrible to work with. So Dettol, I put them in there, I basically let them soak, and I leave them for about 24 to 48 hours. You can go back in with a toothbrush and scrub off all the paint. Now, here's where Dettol gets really annoying. You can't then wash it off, you have to let it dry. And then you've got to use like soapy water to get it off. If you use water instantly, it becomes this really horrible goopy mess and it becomes very hard to get it off the model afterwards. So you've got to avoid that. Also, Dettol has a horrible smell. If you get it on you, you become the smell of Dettol. It's horrible to work with. It's also really expensive. Just buying it in general is quite expensive. But once you use and strip some minis in that solution of Dettol, that solution needs to be thrown out because it becomes a goopy, like swamp tank of paint and Dettol. It's horrible. So then people recommended I used IPA. And I noticed that I just abbreviated it last time and people were then asking me in the comments. So it's isopropyl alcohol, I believe, or isopropanol. Basically, alcohol. So I use 99% alcohol. And I've got loads of this kicking around because of my resin 3D printing. I have to do, obviously, all the cleanup process. Now, this is much nicer to work with. I fill up a container with it, I dunk my models into that, and then I leave them, again, for about 24 to 48 hours, and I can come back in and give them a good scrub. Now, what I have found is it doesn't strip the paint as fast as Dettol. Dettol definitely seems to work quicker, but it's horrible to work with. Now, a couple of considerations. If you are going to work with IPA, try not to breathe it in. You want to be in a well-ventilated area. Make sure you're gloved up as well. And probably the same as well for Dettol. Make sure you're gloved up because it's a harmful chemical. If you're breathing this in, it's not good for you. It's also highly flammable. So you'll see some people using like an ultrasonic cleaner. Do not use IPA in your ultrasonic cleaner unless you want it all to explode. It's just a recipe for disaster. And I also believe that's true of Dettol as well, but don't quote me on that one. So I use IPA, put it into a container, give them a good scrub. Now, another couple of things that you might want to just have answered at this stage. If you're using Games Workshop plastic in IPA, I've left mine now. There's some in the garage currently that have been in there for about 3 months because I forgot about them. They've not melted. The plastic is good as new. Once you scrub that paint off, it is fine. So you can leave that in there for a prolonged length of time and there's no issues. If you're using something like fine cast, just be careful. I wouldn't use IPA with it because it's resin and resin doesn't like to be soaked in IPA. So again, your mileage may vary. Just make sure you double check the type of either plastic or material that you're trying to strip the paint from. Now, another part of the stripping process is when do you know it's done? Because actually what I tend to do is I will get the paint off the main bits. And sometimes you can't get all the paint off. Sometimes they just use, like the previous owner has used some really strong paint that just can't be stripped. And that's fine. If you can't get it all off, it doesn't really matter. The main areas you want to be concentrating is the high build-up ones, the ones where it's caked on there. And most of the time you can get that off and it's no problem. A lot of mine will still have little bits of paint on there when I go back to prime them. And that doesn't matter. It all comes down to how much you're willing to accept. And once you go over that with, either a rattle can or an airbrush, it's going to cover up all those pieces anyway. It doesn't matter. You're just trying to strip off those really thick layers of paint. Now, the next bit is preparing the models. And somebody asked a really interesting question about how do I fix the models that are like just in quite poor condition? And honestly, I've got quite a few of those. And with Space Marines, in my opinion, it's easy to do. So this might not apply to absolutely everything that you've got. If you're using, I don't know, some undead skeletons and stuff like that, or some models that are quite fine in detail, this will be harder to fix. However, what you want to do is make sure you've got a really good bits box, and don't be afraid to cover up those areas. So in Space Marines, a lot of the time when I've been taking the arms off, for example, because they're using plastic glue and stuff, when you pull an arm off or you cut an arm off or something like that, it takes like this side of the Marine off as well. So what I try and do is when I put a new arm on there is position it so it hides that hole that's been left behind and make sure the shoulder pad like gets in the way and stuff like that. And then go into my bits box, you know, if I've got something that's quite a glaring hole, maybe put like a purity seal there to cover it up. Also, I use a little bit of like green stuff to kind of tack it in there. If it's a bigger hole, you can put some green stuff in there, smooth it out, or try to retexture it to match the rest of the model. It does a great job. Also, super glue is your friend. And this probably isn't recommended, but what I do anyway is if I've got a smaller hole that's like underneath an arm and I don't want to get the green stuff out and wait for the curing process and stuff, just dump some super glue in there and like smooth it out. Seems to do a pretty good job. Like I said, it's definitely not the recommended one, but it works for me. So cover up any of those like glaring issues with some extra bits. If you've got a skeleton or something like that, can you put like a scabbard on it to cover up a bit, or just some other bit of decoration that covers some of those areas that are broken? If you've got some good bits that you can swap things out about, it's fine. And then give them a spray. The best thing to do whenever you're doing stuff like this is just give them a spray, get them primed, and then judge whether or not it looks good. Because when it's this model that's maybe looking a bit tattered and you've tried to cover up some of those bits, and it's just pure plastic, it often will look like crap. But once you spray it, suddenly the model comes together and it looks so much better. I will have all the bits that I use linked down below as well, because I know a few people have been asking what I personally use. But like I said, throw it down in the comments if you're in a different country or what like materials you use to do the stripping. It'd be really helpful for everybody else to know. And if you've got any other tips and comments and stuff like that, throw it down in there, because it's always really helpful, not just for me, but for the rest of the community. And if you've got any questions you'd like me to answer, again, drop me a message on Discord, send me an email, throw it down below, and I'll try and pick it up. In the meantime, happy painting, and I'll see you soon. Bye.